All right, so I'm going to just I want to just talk about history a little bit and how I think history matters. And I know, the moment we kind of put something up there about history, it's for many people don't get, many of us don't get excited about history. I get excited about history because history is now. Like we're making history. And when you get to a certain age, like my age, you really see the importance and the value of understanding and making history. So it's actually pretty cool. But I want to start by talking about religion for a hot minute. And so these geneticists and archaeologists and anthropologists put their heads together to try to ascertain what the prophet Jesus of Nazareth probably would have looked like. And this is the image that they came up with. And I talked about this in the one reading that you did for the last exam. But this is about they think this is probably about as close as they would get to understanding what Jesus, who is, for those who don't know, he is in the Christian tradition considered to be God, really, the Son of God, but God, part of the Trinity. And but he was born Jewish. They estimate he would have been about 5'1", maybe 5'2", so really, really short, right? How tall are you? 5'1"? How much do you weigh? Dude, perfect. Oh, I can ask that. Can you stand up really fast? So he would have been about. Wait. So he would have been about Candace's height and Candace's weight. Really, just think about that for a second. Here, step back a little bit, because it's really intense, right? I think that most people, who identify as Christian, who have a belief that the Christian belief is that Jesus, Candace, aka Candace, but Jesus is going to come back to earth again, and that will be to redeem. I mean, there are all sorts of things. I don't have to get into it, but I think the idea is that if Jesus came back to earth, given all the depictions that people in Christian traditions have, nobody would think that he's going to be Candace's size. It's just not. I'm sure that nobody thinks that, right? In your mind's eye, you're not thinking. Thanks, man. People have this idea because the way Jesus is portrayed is always a really tall person. And always like a really low booming voice sort of thing. And 5'1" or 5'2" and 110 pounds is really, really tiny. And so, I don't know. I just have this idea. I'm not saying, now that I'm saying it, for those of you, for example, who are Christians, now that I'm saying this, I'm sure that you're saying to yourself, well, no, I wouldn't picture Jesus as being really tall or being fair-skinned or having straight hair or whatever. I wouldn't do that. But that's now that I'm talking about it. It's like kind of when you go to a comedy or you listen to a comedian. You listen to a comedian and they're telling a joke, and as soon as they tell the joke, you say oh yeah, I've thought that, but you didn't think it ahead of time. It's one of those things. This is the whole study of sociology. This is what I deal with all the time. Anyway, so Jesus clearly would have had. These are the features, right? So first off, I have to pose the question that if, for people who are white, let me just speak for a hot minute to people who are white and who are Christians. If Jesus had been depicted like this your whole life, as 5'1", 5'2", dark skin, how connected do you think you would have felt to Jesus throughout your life? Right? How connected do you think you would feel? And it's a rhetorical question, right? And it's an interesting rhetorical question because almost across the board, people depict their prophets and they depict God, the image, the gods, whatever their gods are, in their own images. Because you can't not do that. right? It's hard for me not to imagine, if I grew up as a Christian, I did grow up as a Christian, not to imagine that Jesus was someone who's, like my personal savior and really connected, the Son of God, etc. When all the images around me are Jesus as a white guy, it's really hard for me to not see Jesus as a white dude. Like, really. And if I had grown up with this image of Jesus, I just wonder, like in Christianity, I just wonder how much, well, first off, would we have had the chattel slavery system that we had in the United States? You know what I mean? Would we relate to people in the Middle East in the way that we do? I don't know. So a buddy of mine, a Korean friend, sent me these artist renderings of Jesus and the stories from the Bible, but rendered as Korean stories. Now, in Korea, about 25% of the population is Christian. And it's actually an interesting story. History matters. It's actually not because of Christian missionaries. But 25% of the population is a lot. And so when we go everywhere in the world, we see the gods and the prophets and so on depicted as people where they are. So look at, here's Mary. This is the nativity scene. So here's Mary, and here's all the people around. I guess this is probably Joseph, depicted as Korean. And of course, right? So you go to Korean churches, you go to Chinese churches, you go wherever in Asia, and you see images of Christian images. You're going to see images, many of them, who depicting all of the characters, all the people as East Asian. So here's the Last Supper, all these Korean guys. Now, mind you, right? This is an artist's rendering of things. It was, but this is I just use these because they're really cool, and I had them. Here's the baptism. So there's Jesus, right, as this Korean guy, right? So imagine in your church, imagine you go home. Those of you who are going to go home, and those of you who are Christian. And I'm only talking right now just about Christianity, but I'll hit on other religions in a hot second. But imagine that you go to church and all of the images that you see are no longer the images that were there, but they're all Korean images. They're all these. Because it doesn't matter, really, but imagine that they are. Because if they're depicting white people or light-skinned people with thin noses and straight hair, those aren't adequate, those aren't correct images. So you could just throw those out. So why not replace them with these? And then what would happen? What would people say? How would they react? How would you react? How would you feel if suddenly, your God, who you're worshiping as your personal Lord and Savior, is this Korean dude? Or was Korean. Now he's just beyond, body, right? So here's rescuing Peter. Look at there's Peter. Awesome, man. And you see, of course, the halo around Christ, because that's just the thing that... and here's the Passion of Christ and the Dolorosa, the saddened road, the sad road, the painful road, actually. The crucifixion. You know what I mean? That's really intense. Can you go, if you're a Christian and you go to Korea, could you go to a Korean church and sit down and start worshiping? Because it's a church, Christian church that has a cross, right? And could you worship all the images that are of some Korean guy? Could you do that? How comfortable would you be doing that? That's really the question. Just how comfortable. And I'm not saying you wouldn't be comfortable, you shouldn't be comfortable, you're a bunch of losers because you wouldn't be, I don't know, you might be completely comfortable. But my hypothesis is that most of us get used to worshiping our creators in images of us. And so, what's up, dog? And so because of that, we just have that certain level of comfort, and then it's a little bit, it's like trying on a pair of shoes that's kind of really new and that sort of thing. Okay? So here, check this out. Here's the Ascension. Those are cool images, by the way. All right, so here's a kind of a typical, this is what I grew up with, right? That's, there's Jesus. Blue eyes. Jesus didn't have blue eyes, my friends. So any depiction of Jesus with blue eyes, there's no way he had blue eyes. If he did, it wouldn't have been God impregnating Mary. It actually would have been him having blue eyes. It would have been the greatest miracle of life itself. So he didn't. straight brown hair, long thin nose, the whole thing, right? It's like, nah, but you get comfortable with that, right? Because that's the image, and you could say, well, yeah, but that's not what matters, because when I think of God or when I think of Jesus, I don't think of those things, and I would say, okay, that's cool, but why don't you go home and surreptitiously switch out all of the images in your church or congregation or whatever it is with those images from Korea and see if it matters. Because if it doesn't matter, maybe it doesn't matter to you, but my guess is it probably matters to a lot of people, and people would be talking about it, and people would be saying things like, this isn't right, and this is wrong, Jesus didn't look like that. Well, he didn't look like this either. So it's just really, it's one of these things to think about. That's me, by the way. When I started teaching, this was actually a beer label that I used to brew beer, and it said, there was a small E and an R, so it said, beer here now. But yeah, so here's the story, right? So that's what I looked like when I first started teaching 119. God, I mean, hippie, man. So I was smoking way too much weed back then. Or not enough, I'm not really sure. But, so when interesting story, when I was living in Ecuador and doing all of my research back in the day, I was working with the church, following the church around. So sometimes I would be with priests, and we'd go up into these communities, right? I was in a pretty rural province, and I would travel out with the priests, and then we would go visit these really faraway communities. Sometimes we'd be walking for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes longer. Sometimes we'd have to go and stay overnight and then go further. Sometimes we'd be on horseback. Sometimes it's just like, because these were really far, remote communities. And many of the communities where we would go had never seen a white person, right? They had seen images, but they never actually met a white person, right? So someone of European ancestry in this way, right? These are indigenous communities, really, really far away. So these are communities. I remember being in communities when an airplane was going over, and people would ask, like, what is that? Because, they're just really cut off. But anyway, there were a few times when we went into the community, and people who had been seeing images of Jesus forever that kind of looked like this, because the previous priests hadn't kind of gotten rid of that. And so they see those images, and then they see me. Imagine me without the sunglasses, and the people would go up to the priest and say, different people did, and say, is that him? Because, the priests have been saying, Jesus is going to come again, God's going to return, Jesus will return, and this is the Christian story, right? And so then the priest shows up one day with Jesus, and people naturally are thinking like, yeah, man, here he is, right? Is this him? Is this it? You were saying he's going to return, so did you bring him to us? So anyway, it's kind of cool, man, to have a moment when someone thinks that you're Jesus. And I don't mean because you're in a cult or something, right? It was just like a 3 to 5 second highlight of my life, actually. Just, blessing people and so on. All right, man, here's another one. Jesus smoking a bone. I don't know what cathedral. I don't know where I took that photo, but it's on some cathedral somewhere. It's probably in Amsterdam. But maybe it's in Denver by now. I don't know. I didn't know Jesus smoked. Maybe that explains some things. Here's another one. So look, you got your black guy here. This is Judas, guaranteed. Right? So this is from Jesus Christ Superstar. So check this out. Even here, you can't get... So, here's Mary, here are the apostles, but guaranteed the black guy is Judas, because the black guy is going to turn against Jesus, the white guy. Look at him, long, thin nose, straight hair, the whole thing. You know what I mean? You can't get away from this shit, right? And you can't make it up either. This is so deep within us. It is so intense. And of course, people come up with images of their prophets that look like them. That's just how it is. And it's really difficult to get away from that. You have to work really, really hard to imagine that a creator is not like you. So, for example, it's just like God, can I just say, I'm just throwing stuff out to you, right? All I'm doing is just poking, just not poking, but I'm just putting stuff out to just think about, right? So God is neither male nor female, right? God is God, but we use the male pronoun for God. So we're always referring to God as a him. God the Father. God, you never say God the Mother, like we don't in the West. It's just not part of it. It's always him. What does he think? God thinks this, he that. It's like saying mankind when you mean humankind. And my wife never, ever, ever lets that go. Any situation she's in, she'll be like, what are you talking? Mankind. What do you mean? When men ruled the world and men created language and men determined the constructs and the contours of language, men decided that mankind refers to all human beings, male and female. And men were not thinking when men create that women and men are on the same plane or have a level of egalitarianism or equality. It is not. Men are the dominant group. And so mankind becomes the thing. And women, y'all just got to live with that. And so, just like you could stop ever saying mankind, and I am telling you, it will... It's just a test. For those of you who still say it, you don't have to. You can just disregard what I'm saying, like probably maybe have disregarded lots of things that I say, but do a test. Try to never say mankind again, or man. The quest for man is to understand himself. Try to never say that. Just see what happens. See if it shifts some things, right? So equally, what if you run a test and never, ever refer to God as a man, but in fact, start referring to God as a woman? Because if God's not you might be saying to yourself, but God isn't a woman. Well, God isn't a man either. So what if you just start using woman, speaking to God as a she? Oh, what does God want for you? How is she speaking to you? Start doing that, even in public, in your social circles, and see how people respond. And then you could respond with, well, God isn't a he either. Oh, yeah, I know that, but I'm just uncomfortable. We just don't use that. It was like, why not? We don't use it because men have controlled the language of the world. And language is power, because language shapes how we understand things. And so, as an experiment, I offer you a really cool thing to do, which is maybe just to the end of the year, always refer to God as a she and just see how people react. Utterly fascinating. And I don't think God's a he or a she. I never used he for God. And so it doesn't really matter. But I actually usually mostly say she, just because it's just my way of being provocative. But anyway, so now, because people depict God in their images, right? So in Latin America, because Christianity was forced on to the indigenous peoples of the Americas by the Spanish and the Portuguese, all the images are the images that the Spanish and Portuguese brought to them. But there are all these really cool priests and nuns and lay clerics who are really trying to get past that and trying to not see Christianity as this dominating religion, but as a liberationist religion. And so they start depicting God as indigenous, in this case as a campesino. So you see, I took this photo when I was in Peru last summer. And so here's This is Jesus, the Christ child, and Joseph and Mary as campesinos, wearing ponchos. Awesome, right? It's just like, of course, create Christ in the image that you are. So, here is this. So when I was in Ecuador, all these really more progressive priests, they would just take like even a statue and just put a poncho on it. Or put a sombrero on it or something, right? Somehow to make it. See, this is a machete, right? And this would be the handle of a shovel. And so here's this indigenous guy, right? And this is an indigenous man, probably Quechua, could be Aymara, but probably Quechua. And he reflects the image of Jesus. Because Jesus is going to be in your image, which is pretty awesome. And so here's the black Jesus. This is this Black Youth Project. I pulled this off of their website. But, Jesus wasn't black either, right? So there are a lot of, people of African tradition or of sub-Saharan African ancestry try to sort of claim that Jesus was black. He wasn't black either, right? But nonetheless, it's closer, right? So, why not? Imagine, so for just white people, right, for a hot minute, imagine that at your church, your people, everybody at your church worshiped that guy. That was the image that they used at your church. How do you think people would talk about race relations? How would it be different? How could it be? You know what I mean? Just like thinking outside the box. How awesome that is. Dude, is that not awesome? Is that awesome? Man. Okay, we're back to this guy, right? So, the real Jesus. Once again, I will say that we see this everywhere, right? We see it in all religions. So, in Hinduism, we see it in the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, which is like the 5th or 6th book, I think, of the Mahabharata, which is really the story, right, of Hinduism, but the story of the creation of the earth. And whenever it's depicted, all the images are depicted. This is the creation of the earth. They're all of people of Indian ancestry. They look Indian. They don't look Western. They don't look African. They look Indian. And I think in some ways, by the way, Islam maybe has this down most effectively, right? In Islam, you can't create any images of God, of Allah, or of the Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, or of all of the other lesser prophets. So Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Mary, none of those other prophets can be depicted. Which is why once in a while you'll see that people will make cartoons and make fun of Muslims or whatever, and some more radicalized Muslims get really upset and start causing all sorts of havoc and stuff because you just don't do that in Islam. And there's a way in which it's kind of cool because you never ever have an image in your mind's eye of what God looks like or what any of the prophets look like. So if you're dark skinned, you can see in your mind's eye all of the prophets as being dark skinned. If you're light skinned and you're Muslim, it's really easy to envision all of the prophets and God as being light skinned. And if you're whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But this is this idea in Islam, and it's spelled out in one of the hadiths that you just don't do that. And I think it's I don't know. I think it's pretty cool myself. Did you know that about Islam? Does anyone want to add anything? I'm going to keep going. Dude, isn't life awesome? Really? It is, right? Dude, thank you, man. It's just so spectacularly cool that human beings have the ability to have all of these differences that we have and mostly get along with one another. And I think we would get along more with one another if we understood things like the kind of stuff that I just talked about with even our religions and our gods. I just feel like we'd probably get along much, much better, and we would understand each other more than we do. And somehow, for me, that just feels like a really, really valuable thing. And it's worth thinking about and talking about. But now, with no further ado, let's talk about Thanksgiving. And how many of you, if I said, hey, you could come up here, and if I said, I'll give you the mic, and you got like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and tell us the story of Thanksgiving, and what it is, and how it came about, and, how many of you could do that? Maybe 2 minutes. I'm not going to ask you to do it, so you can raise your hand. How about 2 minutes? We got 1, 2, couple, maybe 3. Man, all right. So here we are. If you're not from the U.S., so we have this holiday that falls, the initial Thanksgiving holiday, when it was first conceptualized. Yeah. I wish I could tell you what I was just thinking, man. But it's like when you come back from one of those places you go and when you ingest certain things, and then you try to tell somebody what you saw and you just can't. So listen, man. We have this holiday. Hang on. I'm just going to speak to people on the stream who are not in the U.S. So we have this holiday here in the U.S. It's called Thanksgiving. And it's a holiday when the only purpose of it, really, in practical terms, the only thing we do is gather together in small communities, usually families, and eat. And that's it. There are no rituals other than a meal, a feast meal. And it's always the Thursday. It was initially conceptualized as being on the 26th of November, but that kind of went away and eventually became the last Thursday in the month of November. And so people come together and they just celebrate by having a meal together, and usually in families. And it's actually a really cool holiday. And most often, it's most often in family units, man. That's it. Cool? Got it? So those of you? All right. So here you go. Think about when Europeans first started coming to the America. I'm gonna walk you through this cosmic. Just follow me, okay? Just follow me, dude. So Europeans, when Europeans first came to the Americas, they weren't pilgrims. No, they didn't even refer to themselves as pilgrims until the 1800s. Nobody did. It was not about pilgrimage. It was not about this sort of religious. For a very small group of people, it was. Very small group of people. But even then, they wasn't a pilgrimage per se. They were leaving some kind of way, persecution of some sort, and seeking some place where they could practice their belief system in the way that they wanted to, but they didn't see themselves as pilgrims. So the whole idea that this image of the indigenous peoples and what is considered to be pilgrims is like, first off, it's just right off the bat wrong. They're not pilgrims, right? So most people who came here because they were really poor and seeking something. If you're wealthy and you're doing really well, you're not going to leave your land on a boat to go who knows where you're going, having no idea, almost certainty that you're not going to return, and that very quickly the tales of death and starvation and suffering are just rampant. So it's really unlikely you're ever going to return. And so what's going to make you do that, other than somehow something in you is just trying to cling to some sense of a better life? You get here to the Americas in these boats, and you got to figure out, first off, you got to land, and once you land, you got to survive. And how do you survive? Like, you're in this, imagine that, I don't know, you ever watch some of these programs? Sometimes one of my in-laws, which is where I'll be next week, they'll turn on some of these programs on television about survival in Alaska or something. And like, can you imagine survive? So imagine being these people and landing somewhere in this territory and somehow trying to survive. And the idea that they immediately got off the ships and started killing indigenous peoples is not what happened. They didn't immediately do that. The only way they were able to survive, is because they got assistance from the indigenous peoples who were here. They never would have survived. It's just not possible. And you always have men, women, and children, and it's just like, oh my God. So you have all these boats coming over. Not all these, but slowly they started to build up, and they start landing. And let me just stick with North America, where ultimately you would get to a scene like this up here. And so so this is all the Thanksgiving piece. I'm giving you the background to Thanksgiving, right? And they come ashore, and there's people living here because this is a land that is populated. And the people who are living here don't attack them at all, because this is not, certainly somebody got attacked somewhere, but very rarely did that ever happen. Mostly people were very cooperative, and the indigenous peoples here were really wondering, who are these strange looking people in this big boat? And what are you doing here? And these strange-looking people carrying things with them that are very intriguing to the people who are here. Just as the people who are here, the indigenous people, the so-called Indians, and we say Indian only because Columbus had the idea that he was seeking a new route to India. So when he landed in Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti, he actually made his crew sign a pledge that they had actually arrived in India. So the idea is these are Indians because we're in India, but they weren't in India because they didn't make it to India because they couldn't get through to India, but he was looking for another way to expand the spice trade. But in any case, so people, the indigenous peoples, the Indians, are helping out. Like they're establishing these relationships, and people are learning to communicate with one another, and then slowly learning each other's language, and time goes on and things start to build. And then, the indigenous people start dying because the Europeans are bringing all of these diseases for which they did not have immunities. And the Europeans are dying because they are also contracting diseases and not eating the right foods, and you're just suffering, just like, oh my God, just suffering because they're not eating, right? So eventually, in 1621 in Massachusetts, so this has not been going on, right? So the initial settlers are settling in the Americas, and then pretty quickly, in the Americas, the conquistadors start brutalizing the Indians. Right, the indigenous people. I mean, it was just massacre after massacre, realizing that, hey, we're going to conquer them and we're going to enslave them. And in fact, most indigenous scholars identify the genocide that happened in the Americas as the longest, most extensive genocide ever to be known in human history, which is right here. And so in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, it's a different story. But in North America, it's not that. So people are dying, and then there are these skirmishes, and people fight, and things happen, and there are battles, right? And at some point in time, these two groups of people from this particular tribe, and the Europeans come together on this one particular day in 1621, and somehow it's not even certain that there was a feast. And there have been other feasts before this. It wasn't the very first time. Of course, it happened many times because the Europeans, dude. I'm just okay, I know that I feel like you're listening, but this is so effing exciting to me. This is so fascinating. Like, when you get this, you start to see things like, oh shit, Thanksgiving. I get it. I understand it. I'm just going to keep going. So look, there guaranteed was some sort of feast that happened, some kind of gathering. And then, shortly afterwards, then things fell apart. Right? And I actually put this quote to be this guy, but I'm not really sure what happened. Because not long after the feast, there was this major battle when 500 to 700 indigenous peoples were slaughtered of a particular tribe by the Europeans. And so this guy says, hey, for the next 100 years, every Thanksgiving Day, it's going to be this day that in honor of the bloody victory, thanking God for the battle that we won, meaning the slaughter of the Indians in that particular region. And it's just, then it starts to become slaughter after slaughter after slaughter, and massacre after massacre. Because then it starts to become taking the land. And Thanksgiving, by the way, does not really become something serious until George Washington declares that it is such. And then Abraham Lincoln in 1863 decided that it would be a national holiday. So it's only been a national holiday since 1863 in the United States, which is actually a pretty long time, come to think of it. Okay? So here, let me walk you through a couple things. So once again, the idea that we have is indigenous peoples came down from Asia, although recently I got an email from somebody of African ancestry deciding that I was a complete charlatan because the Americas were first discovered, I guess if we want to say, by the Africans long before the indigenous people. So Africans were the very first people here in the Americas and just came across the Atlantic.
She didn't say Africans. She used the word Aboriginal and black.
Oh, yeah, Aboriginal and black.
Which she was claiming is something different.
Oh, right, okay. But I've gotten the other thing with Africans. People have the idea. But who knows? I don't know where people come from. I have no idea. Maybe we just come from outer space. But look, here's a map. This is one of the earliest maps of the Americas that we have, 1865. And these are all of these towns that were established. And notice that there's nothing here, right? See, look at it in South America, right? Here's Hispaniola, and here's, right? Notice how it's just all empty. You see the Mississippi River? The French established settlements along the river, because you always do along the river, but it's all empty. But it wasn't empty, right? This wasn't an empty land. The land was all inhabited by people who had come many, many, many centuries, millennia before. And then people came with the idea that they wanted the land. And well, you have to have the thing that's most important. Here, let me show you this. So we come back. Hang on. I got to decide how I want to say this. First off, imagine that you're Native American in the U.S. and imagine that there's this major national holiday when Americans come together and they celebrate the goodwill and they celebrate their families and they celebrate their histories and they celebrate everything that is about them. But you know that the only reason that they can celebrate all these things is because really of the genocide and the slaughter and the death and the displacement of your ancestors. And so, you live in this really weird space of always having to, when you start to learn about these things and understand these things, you have to juggle them all. Like it's a constant juggling act, right? You have to kind of make sense of, wait a minute, But most of these people who came, most of the people who were establishing these settlements, they weren't rich Europeans. They were really poor Europeans. And they're just trying to find space for themselves. In the same way that, like they're just trying to make sense of their lives. The same way that when one of us buys a cell phone, we're not thinking about all the slavery that goes into the cell phone. There's more slavery that went into making this cell phone. There's more slavery that went into making the products and the minerals and products for the cell phone. Then there were more slaves who are participating in it than there were slaves at the peak of slavery in the United States. Back at the peak, which would be in probably like the 1830s, 1840s. So most of us aren't thinking about that. We don't pull every time you pull your cell phone out, imagine that, you pull it out and you start thinking, slave labor. I got it. And you're thinking about it, right? But how many of you think about slave labor every time you pull your phone out? Probably nobody, right? You're not thinking about that. Well, these people, when they came to the Americas, they were just looking for some place to go. And there's land here and things are happening and there are people here, but they're not thinking, hey, wait, I'm taking land from these people. Just like you're not thinking when you pull your phone out, hey, there's people's blood in my phone. Like that, if you knew, if you really knew, if you went and watched and saw, even could just bother to, watch videos, it'd be really, really hard to just pull a phone out and not really think about it. Because that's just the way it is. Well, if it's just the way it is, then I guess it's just the way it is here, right? People get displaced, and that's how life is. And when the Chinese or the Koreans do it to us, that'll be just the way it is, right? When the Chinese are ruling the world, and if you have grandkids, if we survive, and you have grandkids, they'll be speaking Chinese, right? And that's okay. There's no problem with that. It's cool, right? It's just how it is. Like, whatever. You might as well start learning Chinese. You can teach them, for crying out loud. All right. So anyway. I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just trying to get us to think. Let's just think. It's okay. It's good, right? We speak Chinese, dude. We speak Korean. Dude, who cares? We speak English. It's all good. But what matters is there's maybe a sense of, like a reverence. Like when I think about, like for me, Thanksgiving, whenever I'm involved in Thanksgiving, I always say a prayer. So, you can imagine Sam the atheist is the one praying. But the people around me are usually more atheists than I am, but I make them listen to my prayer. And I always say a prayer for the indigenous peoples and the history that goes into this. And then we just take a moment to even just have a moment of reverence for it, for crying out loud. So, I'm not an atheist, by the way. Hey, guys, what's up? Oh, man. So check this out. This is this poster. What's happening, man? Can I pet him? So, all right. Just dogs. When you have dogs, it's just like, it's just going to be okay. You know what I mean? Dogs. All right. So imagine this poster, right? This is land that was owned by somebody. And here's the poster, Grand Rush for the Indian Territory. So they kick all the indigenous peoples who don't leave willingly, they're, put into reservations or they're killed, right? And then now is the chance to procure a home in this beautiful country. 15 million acres of land, now open for settlement. It's just like, think about that. I tried, a former student of mine who's Navajo and is on the Navajo reservation. I tried to get him to Skype into class today, but he was busy. Just see that. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. This is red land, right? This was red land. And then it became red land because of the blood that was shed. But it's red land. And you have to, and this is everybody. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, or brown. If you have land, this land right here that we're on is red land. So it doesn't matter. It's all part of it. And there's something, a value of just thinking through that. You know what I mean? And so here are the reservations out. So this is my former student is right here in Arizona, right? It's called the Four Corners area. This is the largest reservation. And by the way, there are 567 recognized tribes in the United States. When we ask people, the answer is like 4, 5, 6 or something. There's 567 recognized Native American tribes in the United States, federally recognized. So Native Americans are still here. So when I look at something like this, and I think wow, this is the equivalent of, for Black Americans who trace ancestry to slavery, this is the equivalent of some of the slave sale posters. It's very similar. That's the same thing. Because for indigenous peoples, land is alive. This is God, right? Land is, you get that, right? I mean, Amin and DJ were here. I think they talked about that. But so anyway, and now take a look at this. Just to check out a couple things. Look at the poverty rate of the United States. This is in 2015. Poverty rate of the U.S. is 9%, meaning 9% are below what is considered to be the standard of poverty for families with children, family with 2 children. Look at Navajo Res. Look at Pine Ridge. Intaw, all reservations, 38%. Look at that, man. Per capita income, the U.S., 41,000, 42,000. Look at the Kickapoo, Crow, and Creek, the Pine Ridge. Per capita income, man. That means on average, a Native American living on the Pine Ridge Reservation makes about $1,500 per year. That's poverty. So the poorest people living in the United States, hands down, are indigenous peoples of the America. So when we celebrate Thanksgiving, and this isn't to feel bad. This is actually, my attempt here is not to be like, oh, when you're sitting and eating all this food and you have too much of it and one thing after another, is not to feel bad. Actually have just a kind of a sense of reverence for everything that went into this, the history and what it is. If you don't feel bad, feeling bad isn't what it's about. But you look at these numbers here, and it's like, man, this is real. And we don't talk about indigenous peoples. So, we have these kind of stories about things like the only time of the year that we really talk about indigenous peoples is Thanksgiving. And even then, we just sort of, kids have for those of you, if you're not in the U.S., people at Thanksgiving will put on plays and school plays. And some kids will dress up as pilgrims. Some kids will dress up as Indians, American Indians, and they'll put a feather in their hair, even though a very small number of tribes had a cultural tradition of putting feathers in their hair. But nonetheless, if you want to portray yourself as American Indian, you got to put the requisite feather in your hair. So, which is kind of just what it is. And then people will put on these little school plays about sitting down at a table like this and having a big feast together, and everybody's really happy and getting along. No one talks about, we're not going to talk about, the other stuff that happened, because that doesn't lead us to feel good. And the problem is, when we don't talk about it, these things just continue. So, can someone ask something now? Just ask me something. Do you have something from the stream?
I have something from Twitter, kind of. It's actually from the stream, too.
All right, go ahead, man.
We can make a lot of money.
Oh, God, yeah. I need to do a Joel Osteen thing. Man. I could be rich.
Well, actually, he just had Kanye West this past weekend. So.
Oh, he did? The guy that drops the M-bomb, according to,
Well, his new
John.
album's called Jesus is King, so it makes up for
Jesus
all of
is
the
King,
last
yeah,
N-bombs that he wrote and all of his
Notice
other
he didn't
songs.
say Jesus is queen, you know what I mean? But then you people would say, oh, you're saying Jesus is gay. He's a queen. Like, oh my God. This is what I'm talking about, you know what I mean? Just say Jesus is queen for a hot minute, you know what I mean? All right, go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, no, God is queen. I guess Jesus is a man, so he'd be a king. Yeah, whatever, who cares? Yes, ma'am.
I just kind of wanted to know.
Close.
I just kind of wanted to know why the Indian tribes, or like the recognized tribes for Native Americans, are the poorest. Like, how does that work?
Why are they so poor?
Yeah, like where does it come
Than the
from?
reservations?
Yeah.
Well, think about this, right? So we took the land. Go back to this. Look at this. Procure a home in beautiful Indian country. What it also means is the best land, the most fertile land, the most productive land, and the land with the most minerals. And indigenous peoples being forced off and pushed off into land that was less productive and so on, right? So all these reservations that you see here are all in lands that really are mostly much less productive, okay? So now we force people into smaller and smaller tracts of land, and they're living inside of this land and cut off from the rest of the world. And we don't make it easy in any way, shape, or form, right? If you read the history of indigenous peoples and the legal, all the shenanigans that happen, like, well, of course they're the poorest, right? They couldn't be anything but poor because they don't have access to anything else. Even for a while, they legalized gambling on reservations, but they legalized gambling on not all reservations, but some. They did it in such a way that it didn't enrich reservations, so it's like all just falls apart. So does that answer your question? It's sort of like you take poor people. Look, it's just like you take the people who you really want to kill. You want off the land. You just got to destroy them. You got to get rid of them because you got all these other people that are coming in, and you represent all these other people that are coming in, and you see them as savages and brutes and uneducated and impossible to really do anything with, right? And so then you got to do something with them. You just like tuck them away and hide them away, and then we have this whole reservation system. It's just. I mean, it's really unbelievable the level of poverty and so on. Does that make sense?
Who has heard of Pine Ridge before today?
Does anyone know about Pine Ridge? Wow.
So only a couple of us? I would Google it when you have some free time and just look at some of the videos or pictures that are coming from that area.
I used to show video. Hey, by the way, DJ, who is here, mother of my goddaughter, she teaches a class and in May takes students out to the White Lake and to these reservations right here. And so the class is in the springtime, and I think it's on Monday nights. And then, you sort of learn all about indigenous cultures. And then in May, you take a 2-week trip out to the reservation, and you never get a chance to go. You get access to a reservation that nobody ever has access to. Lots of ceremonies and healing ceremonies, including some really cool healing ceremonies and so on. So if anyone's interested in that class, talk to me and I'll point you to it. Who else has a question? Dude. Dude, that's funny, man. Yeah. That's very funny, man. Yeah. Don't know how to. Did some Indian put that up there, man? One of the Ethiopian students probably put that up there. All right, bro.
I was just wondering what you thought about the FSU Seminoles,
The
that
what?
name, the Seminoles,
Yeah.
Florida State, and how they have the guy run out on the horse and throw the thing down in the field,
Yeah, well,
do you have to say
mostly,
about that?
it seems that mostly people are getting away from doing that. Especially Seminoles never had a feather headdress. As far as I know, nobody wore feather headdresses in the South like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, that's just, it's so many levels. It's just like, oh, God. So imagine, right? Well, imagine those are your people, right? And so you can just imagine what that would be, right? Just the mockery of it and so on. But we don't think about it because we don't think about it. Just like we don't think about the slave labor that's in our phones. Like, so there are a lot of things you just don't think about. And if you're not putting our attention to it, and then when we do, we start feeling bad. And so we're like, oh, why do I want to feel bad? I don't want to think about this stuff. So then we stop thinking about it. But then when we stop thinking about it, we become uneducated. We uneducate ourselves because we don't know what's going on. And then we just end up, I don't know, what do we end up doing? Like, I don't know. What do we do? Yeah, that's what I think about. It's unfortunate that it happens. Somebody else. Dude, we're going really slow. Hey, what's up, man? Is this Jack or something? Toby. Yeah. Man. Yeah. See that?
Sam, why hasn't the government given more land and resources to the natives as compensation?
Dude, because all the land is taken. Who are they going to give it from, right? This is like after slavery. Right? You know, the idea was, who are we gonna take it from? Like, you gotta take it from somebody, right? And so we could take, the U.S. federal government owns land, but, who are we gonna take it from? This is the problem. Right? It's like after slavery, really fast. Let me say this, bro. And then, no, go ahead. And then, but it's like after slavery was over, people have the idea that black people, slavery was over, right? So black people, you're free. Right? Okay, now you're free to go make a living and go do everything that you need to do so you can be like everybody else. What are you going to do? You can't go anywhere. You don't have land. You don't have resources. You have nothing. What are you going to do? And then all the people in charge start passing laws after laws after laws to contain any opportunity you might have to get ahead. That you can't travel, you can't own things, you can't go to school. One thing after another. And so therefore, I see this argument, people will say like, well, slavery was over in 1865. Why haven't black people done anything? I'm like, shit, man. Slavery wasn't, first off, it wasn't over. It's like, I don't know, it would be like me, dude, going like, hey man, here's what I'm going to do. Get your snow parka on, and I'm going to take you up to Alaska with a buck knife. And you own all of Alaska. It's all yours. Do whatever you want, dude. What are you going to do? How are you going to survive? How are you going to get on? And then you got all these other people up in Alaska that don't want you there. So, hey, make sure you watch out for them. Because, nothing. It's like no one ever thinks about that. Like, we don't think about it. So, slaves had zero opportunities to go make something happen. In the moments when it might have happened, it really might have happened, the people came along and pulled the rug out from under it. And it was only because of black people's tenacity and willingness. Listen to this. Hey, if you don't know anything about black history, listen to this. Don't take my word for it. Please don't take my word for it. You have to study it for yourself. You probably won't. So therefore, take my word for it. It's only because black people, didn't have the means or the opportunity or the desire to turn their wrath against white people for everything that had happened to them. They didn't have the means, the opportunity, or the desire. They just wanted to get on with their lives and put all of their energy into just making the best out of a really horrible situation. It kept going forward and forward and forward and forward, no matter what happened. And let me tell you, when you study the history from, say, like 1865 to 1965, it's like, oh my God, the fact that we have the level of equality that we have is actually amazing. And it's testimony to the relentlessness that black people have, given how many obstacles were put in the way. Well, it's the same with Native Americans. It's the same with Native Americans. Dudes, you have no idea. I will guarantee, even those of you who maybe if you're an African African American FM studies major, right? Okay, you're on your way, but otherwise, you have no idea of the obstacles that Black Americans faced in the post-Reconstruction period, right up to the present day. I mean, until very recently. And then, bro, I'm going to finish with this, and then you're going to ask your question. And then we have this. Take a look at this. This is median household wealth in the United States. So here's like white, non-Hispanic, all households. So median household wealth, right? So this is all the wealth that you own, everything you own, minus your debt for households, right? And look at Hispanics and look at Black Americans, right? Look how, dude. And white people, because you don't study history, you don't know that, like, it's like, dude, the fact that Black people have that is amazing. It is like, holy shit, how were you all able to, on average, accumulate that much household wealth? How were you able to do that, given what the obstacles that were putting your way? Year after year, day after day. And by the way, it's striking to me, listen, if you're not Black, and even for some of you who are Black and take a more conservative line, like, yeah, we should pull ourselves up by our bootstrap and shit, which is good, and you should, and that's all good, right? But maybe just spend 4 or 5 hours reading about some of this stuff, just a short version of it, and like, you will forever shift how you kind of start to understand some things. Like when you drive through Northeast Philly, and you just see so much poverty and so many people of African ancestry, and you start to understand it. You can't understand it if you don't see history. You can't. You effing can't. Dude.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about King Philip's War, if you knew about that, if you could.
King Philip's what?
King Philip's War between the Wampanoag and the settlers.
Yeah, so King Philip, King Philip was the Native American guy who they called King Philip.
Yeah,
right?
Since I figured most people don't know about when things really turned sour between the two groups.
Yeah, so in that particular case, there was this Native American guy who was the go-between. He learned the languages of the Europeans, and they learned his language, and they called him King Philip. And everything was really good until something turned sour. And I don't know what the thing was that turned sour, but ultimately it led to him being beheaded by the Europeans as shortly after this Thanksgiving meal, and they put his head, as best as they think it's true, they took his head. This is Native American guy who was the guy that was like the go-between, you know what I mean? Between the Bolivians, right? I know, Peruvian? What are you? Peruvian? Between the Bolivian Peruvians and the whoever, right? He was the go-between, but then in the end, something happened and he got on the bad side of things, and they cut his head off and put it on a stake. I mean, I don't know much about the story. I don't want to go too deep into it, but it's just that, right? He's an example of this guy who is just like trying to do the right thing, and in the end, things turn. It's like, but there are also stories. Listen, man, there were also stories of indigenous Native Americans who clearly attacked innocent Europeans, right? So it's like who are just got off a boat and they're just trying to have a new life. Like, my God, like, I don't know. By the way, yeah, who else? Another question. Dude, do you have a question, man? Do you want to know what my prayer is on Thanksgiving? I always pray. Dude, man. It's just... Wait, don't stand against the wall, bro. Yeah, thanks, man. It's a prayer of silence. really for myself, to just come to terms with just life, the mystery, and the good and the bad. Hey, listen, let me, no email. Is there another question off Twitter or anything? Anyone angry or anything? Are we good? That guy. Jesus, are you a female? Dude, I love that. It's awesome, man. Is that you, bro? Oh, killing it, man. Yeah. All right, listen, man. Hey, okay, so look, have a safe week, and